This is the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, and my guest for this show is Ray McGovern, a veteran CIA officer who was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. So this is a continuation of an interview that's already wrapped. But Ray, you talked about as the chair of the National Intelligence Estimates preparing the President's Daily Brief, you had access to an incredible amount of resources and information, and you could basically get authorization to ask any questions, to find out anything.
That's correct, Rob. And more important, I had access to the expertise that existed throughout the intelligence community. And in those days, we only had 12 intelligence agencies, right? Just 12. But the real experts, the honest ones, were known.
Yeah. So I want to ask you one question.
Sure.
Because I had a conversation with somebody about it yesterday. Were we surprised when Glasnost happened, when Russia became free?
Yeah, everyone was.
Why? Why was that possible? How could it be that none of these 12 agencies could know what was going on?
Well, we have to draw a distinction here, okay? When Gorbachev took power as first secretary, we knew he was different, okay? And we tried to persuade Bill Casey, the head of the CIA, Bobby Gates, who was his sort of Russian expert, in quotes, tried to persuade them that this was different. Now, we didn't know how different, but all you had to do was read Pravda every morning and you could see how different. I mean, the first secretary of the Communist Party in such and such a region brought up on corruption charges. That never happened before. The glasnost was the clearness, the openness. Perestroika was rearranging the whole system. This was the real deal. So the difference was those of us who recognized that this was new, and those of us like Bobby Gates who said, no, you're being deceived. These are a bunch of commies. They just are more clever commies. Gorbachev is no better than all the other guys. Don't deal with them. Now, luckily, I knew the real Russian experts, such as they still existed, and most of them did not exist under Bobby Gates because he got rid of them. Mel Goodman, my former colleague, went to the National Defense University. He couldn't stand the slanting of everything Russian. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that when I saw Secretary Shultz, for example, Secretary of State, and I had a little ticker. In those days, we had a little ticker like from the UPI wire. I say, Mr. Secretary, you've just been invited to Moscow. This is 1984. So he looks at me. And he says, wow. Huh. Now, I suppose your leaders there at CIA would say this is a bad idea. So I look stone-faced. I said, what do you think? And I said, Mr. Shultz, I don't always believe what my leaders tell me to believe. Oh. Now, I had been fed by the real experts, the ones I knew, some of whom I trained. I was a Russian expert myself. So
you speak fluent Russian too, right?
There were people who missed the whole thing right till the very end, right until the Berlin Wall fell, And there were those of us who were saying, Mr. Shultz, Mr. Weinberger, Mr. Reagan, look, you can deal with these people. You can verify. We can verify if you have a modicum of trust. So I'm very proud of that era. ERA.
So what I'm hearing then is that the leaders at the time were surprised by what happened because they wore blinders. They only wanted to see what they wanted to see that would maintain their neoliberal, neocon perspective on how to deal with Russia and how to maintain a continuous war state.
Well, that's largely right. And if you look at Bobby Gates, for example, I have to, full disclosure, he worked for me in the 70s. he was reasonably bright, but his ambition was so crass and so transparent that he was a divisive element, a divisive influence in my branch. And I told him that in his efficiency report. Now, he comes in under Casey because he can see 3 Russians under every rock in Nicaragua, and Casey could only see 1. That's an exaggeration, but not by much, okay? Now, turns out later that he was making speeches on the side supporting anti-ballistic missile systems. Now, a lot of money in those systems, and he served on a lot of boards. And by the time he became Secretary of Defense, he had been completely soaked in to the military-industrial congressional complex and never saw a war that he didn't love.
Now let's jump ahead. Let's jump ahead to the way that the Democrats primarily are treating Russia now. Russia's evil, Russia's dangerous. Where do you see, are there comparisons between what was happening back in the late 80s and what's happening now?
Well, here it's even more political. It baffles me as to why so many people can just drink in the Kool-Aid and not realize that the Soviet Union imploded. I hate to say this out loud, but the Russians aren't trying to take over the world anymore. I'll go further. I don't know what incentive the Russians have to sow discord in our country. I'll even go further. Trump. Here's Putin watching Trump 2 years ago. He's saying to his colleagues, my God, Trump, oh, look at it, he's crazy. He's unpredictable. He brags about being unpredictable, and he lashes out at the slightest slight or affront. Oh, man, this is just the guy I want to have with his fingers on the nuclear codes. This is going to be really fun. Do all you can to help him win. Oh, God, it doesn't parse. I think I know something about Russian leaders. What they put the most premium on is predictability. You know, even Hillary Clinton was more predictable than Trump. So it's always been sort of a, I've never been with the program that Trump had incentive to help Trump, that Putin had incentive to help Trump win, or he would encourage his people to do that, or that for some reason he thought Trump had a chance. There wasn't anybody that thought that Trump had a chance at the time when Putin is alleged to have ordered his. So, the whole thing doesn't parse. So what I'm saying here is that the downfall in Russian-US relations came when the United States of America and Western allied secret services mounted a coup on Russia's doorstep in a place named Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine, through which armies had gone, whether Napoleon's armies or the German armies in World War II. And this was a direct affront to Russia. Putin was in Sochi at the Olympic Games. He comes back and says, what are we going to do? Well, the thing that they couldn't let happen is Crimea, with Russia's only all-year ice-free naval base, go into NATO. And so they said, what are we going to do? Well, somebody said, well, how did Crimea get to be part of the Ukraine in the first place? It always was part of Russia. And it came out that the year after Stalin died, Khrushchev, who was from the Ukraine, really didn't have the political support he needed. So he said, I got an idea. Let's make Crimea part of the Ukraine. He got a lot of points for that. How do you do it? He took a little piece of paper here. And he did what you call an ukaz. From now on, Ukraine, now on Crimea is part of Ukraine. Okay, that's 1954. Didn't matter. It was all part of Russia, right? All part of the Soviet Union. Now, all of a sudden, NATO is expanding ever more eastward. Now it matters. So these folks say, well, that's how it happened. Now, let's just do an ukaz. And Putin says, no, we don't do ukazes anymore. What do the people in Crimea feel? So, well, they're all very, very favorable to Russia. So let's have a plebiscite. And they did. They had a referendum. Now, you may not believe this. I've been in Crimea. I've tried to find somebody who voted against rejoining Russia. I couldn't find anybody, okay? They say over 90% voted to rejoin Russia. So that's what happened. Now, what happened?
Sorry,
Well, the people who wanted to make this a casus belli or make a big deal of it, namely Victoria Nuland of the State Department working for Hillary Clinton, she was captured on intercepted telephone conversations orchestrating the coup 2 weeks before it happened, okay? So all of a sudden, we want to have sanctions on Russia. They persuaded our European allies, sanctions on Russia. Then somebody shot down an airplane, MH17, blamed on the Russians. No one knows whether it was the Russians or not. And it went down, down, downhill ever since. So we had the heyday when the Russians helped us a year before in 2013, helped us get rid of all the chemical weapons in Syria's arsenal, okay? That was the heyday. And I have to say that on September 11th, by coincidence, 2013, after the Russians had persuaded Obama, you don't have to attack Syria, we'll help you destroy all the weapons, all the chemical weapons. On that day, Putin wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. You know what he said? He said, I am really very delighted that we have a close working relationship between the United States and Russia, and a close personal relationship between President Obama and myself. The only thing I object to, says Putin in this op-ed in the New York Times, is the notion that some countries are exceptional. He says, I don't buy the notion that one country is exceptional or that some countries are more exceptional than others, because as I see countries, some are more developed, some less, but each is equal in the sight of God, period, end quote. I'm reliably informed that Putin wrote that last paragraph. Now, what does that say? That says that the game's over, the US. If you don't want to play equal here, you want to play exceptional, we have other places to go, China, India, and other places. But look, if you're going to negotiate with us, it's got to be the same. That's when it all went down. That's when 6 months later, you have the coup in Kiev, and we have Obama not able to face up to the people who profiteer on war. I mentioned a little thing before. What about the military-industrial complex? There was a German firm called Maffei, had a French consortium. They were tasked with building the common European battle tank. Dead in the water, no progress. Who's going to fund common European battle tank without any believable foe? All of a sudden, with the seizure of Crimea and the so-called invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there was a credible foe. Look what happened to the stock of Maffei. So there's a little microcosm. That's what it's all about. And people really don't want a decent relationship with Russia, even though, and I hate to say this again, even though Russia's not trying to take over the world anymore, Russia's trying to defend itself from what it sees as threats from the encroachment from NATO in that part of the world.
So you like what Trump is trying to do with Russia?
I say that there's no reason in God's earth where we can't have a more decent relationship with Russia. And, to the degree that paints me as a Trump supporter, I really resent that. Even a broken clock is right. I think it's twice a day, right? Okay. He's right about Korea. He's right about Russia. Now, is he run into opposition on both counts? He sure as hell is. Why did he bring John Bolton, the fellow who destroyed the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the fellow who was called one of the crazies when I was working with the senior Bush?
Why did he bring Bolton?
Because he's not his own man. He was forced to bring in Bolton. And, I don't know exactly how it works, but I know the fact is that when Trump wants to do something, 5 months ago, he says, I want to pull troops out of Syria. Oh, wait a second now. Wait a second. we talked before about, now, Israel wants us in there forever, right? Because they don't want any outcome. They just want more of the same. Well, here's the New York Post today. Headline, page 1. Trump agrees to indefinite U.S. presence inside Syria. Huh. Trump, who said just 5 years ago there'd be a new strategy. Well, no. It's going to be another one to push American objectives, according to senior State Department officials. What are American objectives? They're Israeli objectives. There's no other reason for them. Israeli and Saudi now.
Well, you in our other conversation, you also mentioned that the military-industrial, congressional intelligence, media, academic think tank, they all want to keep war going because that keeps the business going. So that it's Israel and that as well. The money.
Yeah, it's mostly the money, but also, it's similar. But the Israeli lobby, of course, has its own raison d'etre and its own power, which is formidable.
So what you're basically saying, it seems, is that Trump is a very weak man. He may have some good intentions, but he can't accomplish anything. That he folds, that he collapses in the face of the deep state, of the people who tell him what to do.
Well, there are innumerable examples of this, Rob. Let me adduce just one small one. Back, I think it was around October of last year, by law, Trump and the administration had to release all the congressional documents on John Kennedy's assassination. A lot of them left, a lot of them heavily classified. By law, they were to be released. So, morning, Trump gets up. I'm very proud to say I'm releasing all the documents by order of Congress, and this is the deadline, and I'm releasing them. Afternoon, he gets up and says, the FBI and the CIA have expressed reservations, objections to my releasing the documents, and so I'm not going to do them. I will revisit it in 6 months. So McGovern makes a little note in his calendar, right? April. You know what happened in April, right? 6 months later. Did any newspaper person or any pundit or TV down the memory hole? So what's going on? What more do I have to say? Now, these are very sensitive things. They will show, in my opinion, that the CIA and the deep state that existed then, and I include the Joint Chiefs of Staff in that, George Ball, who was the Deputy Secretary of State, called the Joint Chiefs of that time a sewer of deceit, right? So you had the CIA, who had mass grievances because of JFK's refusal to go back on his promise not to send the U.S. military forces to relieve those guys on the beach at the Bay of Pigs. They had it in for him, okay? They also thought, whoop, he's going to give Indochina to the communists. He's already ordered U.S. troops to come out by the end of the year, 1963, and the bulk of them, 2 years later, by 1965, going to give this to the communists, or the Chinese, the Russians. They didn't know. It was just communists. So, yeah. So that's what they reveal, and to the extent that Trump was incapable of forcing the outing of those things, even if they had to be sanitized in some ways, well, that too is very revealing. I hope you will agree.
Of Trump's weakness and inability to actually do what he says he wants to do.
Yeah, especially in these two areas. Now,
okay, now I want to just take a step back. Now, as the chair of the National Intelligence Estimate, presenting the president's daily brief, you spoke to presidents?
I did the president's daily brief for Nixon, for Ford, and for Reagan. Now, for Nixon and Ford, we simply took great care of preparing it, gave it to the courier, and Henry Kissinger would be on the receiving end, and he would write marginalia, rip stuff out, tell Nixon or Ford what to do. So we had no direct access. That was really a problem. Now, with Reagan, With Reagan, we had really good rapport because as soon as he was elected, two of my colleagues went right out there to Pacific Palisades and got electronically the president's daily brief for the next morning, appeared on the scene with fake little ID cards and said to the Secret Service, "We're here to brief the president. We're from CIA." And they said, "You're not, we want to have any, no, you didn't hear this?" Reagan comes down the stairs. He says, "What's going on here?" My friend says, "CIA briefer." So, "Oh, come on in." They had breakfast. Long story short, they had breakfast with Ronald Reagan 6 days a week until he got into Washington. Okay. He loved it. He loved the one-on-one. And they were senior to me at the time. They were very, very good briefers. Now, what happens? He gets to Washington, and George H.W. Bush, who knows, he's the vice president, who knows what the service was like. Actually, he had been head of the CIA, of course. He says, "Now, Mr. President, I think I should get briefed also. So what time do you want to get briefed?" And Reagan says, "Well, now that we're here in Washington, I think maybe I'd like to sleep in, and maybe, I don't know, George, you get briefed, and maybe, yeah, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, my national security assistant, why don't you get briefed at the normal time, 8:30 so, and come to me at 11 and tell me what I should think about." So what was that? We very seldom saw Ronald Reagan unless there was a real crisis going on, but we always saw some combination of, let's say, Secretary Shultz at State, Secretary Weinberger at Defense, a whole slew of national security advisors, many of whom ended up in jail, okay? And Vice President, of course, George H.W. Bush. That was my account. Later, we added the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because we told the president we thought that he should be given equal treatment. So that was the deal. We had a crack at all these people, 5 or 6 of them, depending on who was in town. And each one of them knew that the others were all getting the same briefing with different briefers and a little different supplementary material, updating and so forth. But when they met with the president, they all knew what the basis of the intelligence was. And then it worked out just really well. So the answer is, no, I didn't see the president, but I saw these fellows. And in those days, we were senior analysts, right? We didn't come from the operations side. We were trusted. We saw these people one-on-one, right? Because it was so sensitive. And it wasn't until George Tenet took over and wanted to ingratiate himself with President Bush that he hitched a ride in the morning down with the early morning briefing with the briefers. And so that's the way you adulterate the matter-of-fact briefing. You have the director behind you, and George Bush says, "Now, tell me about these weapons of mass destruction." And
that's where Cheney came into the picture too, right?
Yeah. So it's a crock, right? So you're going to say, I'm glad you asked that question, President Bush. It's a crock. They're lying. There aren't any there. We have a comprehensive monitoring of it by satellite, and no one's found any chemical or biological weapons, and we know they're far from a nuclear weapon. And George Tenet is standing behind you. Well, that's your last day briefing, right? That's how corrupt it became. And that's why those of us who felt really strongly about this discipline, about this incredible job we had, where we could tell the truth without fear or favor, where it was really hard, Rob, to see our former colleagues let themselves be corrupted to that extent. That's what got me and many of my friends off our rear ends, including friends from NSA, from FBI, from all manner of other places. That's why we have this incredible sort of para-intelligence community constructed of people who really still want to tell the truth and are still able to, even though major media avoid us like the plague.
Now, Trump has said that he wants to appoint people who are loyal to him. Where does that play in the intelligence community?
That for us, that's just doesn't parse. This sounds corny. The reason I joined the CIA was because they told me that I would have everything that was collected by the whole US government on Russia, and that I would be able to analyze that, come to conclusions, and as long as my spelling and punctuation was all right, and my superiors agreed with what I thought, it would go right to the president. That's what happened. That was the truth. It was heady. It was really, really interesting. I was there during Vietnam. I was there during when Russia and China started getting at loggerheads. I was able to tell the truth. So, to see that perverted, to see that kind of fall by the wayside. Now, there's only one time since the Iraq debacle where the agency and the whole intelligence community did the right thing. And it's the only time that I can say that a national intelligence estimate played a huge role in preventing a god-awful war. I speak of a war with Iran. Now, again, most people don't know this because it's not in the New York Times, but this is what happened. Bush and Cheney had their eyes on making war with Iran during their last year in office, 2008. So all through 2007, you see Bush and Cheney. Bush as late as late October, saying Iran is just about to get a nuclear weapon. And some correspondent says, well, how do you know that? And Bush turns on me and says, what do you want? World War III? Is that what you want, World War III? Okay, that's the end of October. In November, a national intelligence estimate comes out, an honest one. And it says two things. It says, with great confidence, unanimously, all, whatever it was, 16 agencies at that time, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon.
So who was behind that? Who was behind that honest estimate?
Okay, a fellow named Tom Finger. Now, after the debacle on intelligence prior to Iraq, they looked around for an honest person to do on Iran. And Tom Finger was head of State Department research, okay? He was assistant secretary for intelligence. And they came to him and said, look, we need one on Iran now. We need an honest one. Will you take the job? And he said, no, are you kidding me? I don't want to. I've been through the Iraq debacle. No, you'll be in charge. And you can take your own analyst. So being a patriot, and I don't exaggerate here, Tom Finger went into this whirlpool with 3 good analysts that he took from the State Department. He stayed a whole year well below the radar, okay? He was a master politician, a master bureaucrat, okay? And nobody knew that they had come on especially new information that persuaded them and the whole intelligence community that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon in 2003. Now, they published that in November, early November of 2007. 2 weeks after Bush had said what I just said, he said, now, you don't have to believe me. What did Bush say in his memoir? He said, this was an eye popper. This deprived me of the military option. Quote, for how could I authorize my armed forces to make war on a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. Now, if you were really concerned, it would, hey, call the Israelis. My God, this is wonderful news. No, wow. Hey, they stopped in 2003. They don't have a nuclear. Oh, man, this is great. No, was it? So, long story short, in that one shining moment, it was sort of Camelot for a resurgence of honesty in the intelligence community.
And who was the boss of the guy?
Tom Finger was the shepherd, and the fellow under whose aegis he did it was the national intelligence director by that time. I think it was, I'll remember his name in a second, but he was among the most honest of them. And as I say, Finger didn't let anybody know what he was coming up with. So this is the way he got it done. Now, we gave Tom Finger the award for the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence about 12 years ago because he so well deserved it. Now, what happened to his people? They were attacked. They were maligned. The press was terrible about them. They said they were wrong. And to his credit, Tom just wanted to get the heck out of Washington, right? He long since wanted to retire. He stood around for 15 months to make sure that the people who did the honest work did not suffer in their careers. That's the kind of guy he is. Now, are there any people like that left? I don't know. But the fact that there may be is a disincentive for people like Gina Haspel, for God's sake, to play fast and loose with the intelligence this time on Iraq, for fear that somebody will whistleblow, that somebody will say.
That's the word that was on the tip of my tongue, whistleblowers. It takes whistleblowers to keep people honest.
Yeah. And the thing about Tom Finger is that he's a quintessential whistleblower, but in a very unique sense. He prevented there being a need for whistleblowing. He worked within the system. He knew how to work it. He knew the honest people. He came out and confronted the president and said, no, this is a lie. They're not near a nuclear weapon. And so in that case, there was no need for somebody to do extracurricular things, go outside the system, go to the press and say, look, they're making up stuff about Iran nuclear. I mention this partly because there's so much a live issue now, Rob. The International Atomic Energy Agency of the UN confirms that Iran has not violated the Iran deal 5 years ago. Our allies in Europe say they have not violated that. That was the painstakingly worked out guarantee that Iran would not get a nuclear weapon.
And yet Trump has canceled that deal and added sanctions to Iran.
Yeah. Now, will somebody from the intelligence community have the guts to say, wait a second, now this is a crock, just as they tried to do in 2007? Here's the honest estimate. I don't know if there's anybody left, and that's a real hard thing to say.
No, is this another example of Trump being duped and manipulated?
I don't think he's real well educated on foreign affairs. I think he came to this with a sort of an Israeli.
Leave out the word on foreign affairs, because I think he's not real well educated on just about anything except scamming and ripping people off, maybe.
Well, I would have to agree with you. But I think there's a combination of stupidity and ignorance and just being duped by people that you really you shouldn't really trust. Now, why he had John Bolton come in as his national security advisor? Well, it was totally predictable what Bolton would do. He tried to sabotage the Korean thing and may eventually sabotage it. He tried to sabotage the summit with Putin. And as soon as, remember, after they met on the 16th of July, the headline in the New York Times the next day was, Trump with Putin criticizes U.S. intelligence. Whoa! How could you possibly criticize U.S. intelligence? I mean, it's always been right? Like in Iraq, all that stuff. So the whole thing was.
And Russia for Glasnost.
Yeah. So how could? So it's so transparent what was going on there, and the Times, really doesn't do much without checking with either the agency or with the White House first. And that's different, but it's been around this practice has been around for about 10 years.
And I don't think it would have been possible for Dan Ellsberg to go to the New York Times if it was now. He would have been basically told, well, we'll talk to the president about it. We'll ask for permission first rather than being journalists.
Well, you're right about that, and that's really sad. Dan was never invited to the New York Times until 40 years after the Pentagon Papers. So 71, 2011. I was with him at the New York Times, brand new kind of amphitheater there, beautiful sort of thing, And Jill Abramson, who was running the Times at the time, made the mistake of saying, we're very proud of of publishing all that information about the gross violations of the Fourth Amendment, the dragnet wiretapping. McGovern is rushing to the mic there in the balcony, but before I could say anything, Ellsberg says, well, Jill, you did sit on that information for 15 months. Let's get that on the record. Why is that important? Oh my God. As soon as Cheney came in, he said, look, we're gonna collect everything. And Michael Hayden at the NSA said, yes, sir. Bob Mueller at the FBI said, yes, sir. And gross violations of the Fourth Amendment happened, all of this immediately. Now, who learned about that? This is really interesting. James Risen learned about that. He's got good sources, okay? When did he learn about that? July 2004. Oh, it's an election year. Risen's got this story. He goes to his betters at the CIA. No, actually, it's the CIA annex called the New York Times, okay? He said, look what I've got. And they say, oh, no, you can't do that. Can't do that because it's an election year. And Risen says, wait a second. It's July. Election's November, right? No, you can't do it. Just like that. Whoa. Now, Risen salutes, writes a book about it, right? And in December of the following year, December 2005, he goes to his betters and says, look, my book is now in galley. It's about to appear in 3 weeks. It's a little embarrassing. I'm making big bucks here. You're paying me big bucks, but so I think maybe you want to consider, breaking the story now. Oh my God, no, we can't do that. It's in galley. We're not going to. Oh, okay. The head of the New York Times, Washington bureau chief, are called into the White House after they asked to speak to Bush. Bush says, you can't do this. Okay? There's national security. Wait.
It was Obama, wasn't it? It was Obama, because it was Eric Holder who was threatening.
No, this is 2005.
2005?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe this was a little later on then. I know because eventually I interviewed Risen twice. And I know that it was Holder who threatened him with jail. So
that was much later.
Oh, okay, different story.
Yeah, this is the election period, 2004.
Okay, sorry.
2005. So what happens is Bush says, no, you can't publish it. And Ellsberg says, look, Ellsberg is the head of the Times, of course. He says, we held off for 15 months. You got to understand, we got predicaments, so we're going to publish. And Bush says, well, I'm against it. So they leave. Now, on the 21st of December, 2005. So, wow. A long time after the election and a year and a half after Risen had the story, they published the fact that gross violations of the Fourth Amendment had taken place at Cheney's behest. Okay. Yeah. So my point is simply this, that here's Jill Abramson many years later sort of saying, look, we're proud of what we did in publishing the business about gross surveillance of everything in the United States against US citizens. And she's trying to disguise the fact that they sat on that from July 2004 until December of 2005. What happened in the middle? George Bush got a second term. Now, who knows? But if Risen has been let tell that story, there's a possibility that Bush would not have gotten the second term.
Kerry might have won.
Now, I'm no fan of Kerry either, but, well, anyhow, I asked Jim Risen at a major meeting one time, I said, did it ever occur to you to become a whistleblower? He said, well, I'm a journalist. I said, yeah, but you're an American, right? Yeah. Did you ever serve in the armed forces and swear an oath to the Constitution? No, I forget what he said. I said, well, why couldn't you have just blown the whistle and said, these are terrible things that are going on? Well, I'm a journalist. Well, now, you're more of a journalist than I am, Rob. I don't know what kind of excuse that is, but anything that gave us 4 more years of Bush and Cheney, pretty heinous, okay? And then for the New York Times to brag about having having kept this out of the news from July until November of 2004, so Bush could get reelected, and then bragging about it a whole year later when Bryson says it's in my book, you got to publish it. Well, they did publish it. And then you had General Hagen coming up and saying, well, it doesn't say probable cause in the Fourth Amendment. Well, I can read you the Fourth Amendment. It does say probable cause. And, unless you consider that all of us Americans, there was probable cause to think that we were violating whatever.
Well, I'll tell you something. And you hit the nail on the head with the New York Times. But there's another story with Risen, and basically, he revealed information about all kinds of corruption happening in Afghanistan, and he under Obama, and there he was demanded to release his source of information on that, and he was threatened to go to jail, and there were court hearings about it, at a federal level. It was decided that he could not use his journalism shield to protect that information. And so under Obama, the protection of confidential sources was eliminated for journalists. Mm. And this was Eric Holder, who's talking about running for president too. So Risen did some really good work there, and he stood up and he refused to, he basically was going to go to jail. And it ended up that Obama pushed through Holder prosecutions that ended up in a federal decision that eliminated, for all time, for the future of American journalism, the privilege of withholding information of confidential sources.
Mm-hmm. There was the there was a CIA agent who was sent to jail for 3 years. Anyhow, it was one of those cases where the government said that he was talking with Risen, and there was no evidence that happened. And I remember that case. I don't remember the one that you're talking about. Are you saying, Rob, that journalists can be compelled in court to reveal their sources now?
Yes, exactly that. Yeah, under Obama. And, one of the reasons that I have had very negative feelings about Obama, there are a lot of reasons. That was one of them, the loss of the media's protection from protecting confidential sources. That's huge. And also was the fact that Obama prosecuted more whistleblowers than all previous presidents combined. And then his leadership of the Democratic Party and the DNC during the 2016 primaries. I think Obama is one of the main reasons why we now have Donald Trump, because he allowed and encouraged what was going on to disenfranchise Bernie Sanders from an honest primary election.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he vies with Hillary Clinton for that honor. They collaborated so closely. If you want to look for putting blame on the clown that we have as president today, look at those DNC emails that were leaked, not hacked, and given with a thumb drive to Wikileaks, then published. Now, they were published 3 days before the Democratic National Convention. What were the headlines in the New York Times? Why did the Russians do this? Why did the Russians? John McCain. It's an act of war. Nobody read the emails because the emails revealed that Hillary Clinton, pure and simple, stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. Bernie didn't have enough backbone to say, look, I didn't know this was going on. Let's have an open convention. I'm not going to release my delegates to yours. Now, what happened after that? In my view, what happened after that is a whole bunch of young workers, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed, workers, Bernie workers. They'd say, well, we'll go work for Clinton now. And one of them is is reading the emails. He's like, my God, oh, God, oh. Takes a thumb drive, puts it into his machine, downloads the emails from the DNC, and gets them to WikiLeaks. Now, that's how it happened.
Who is that?
Well, Seth Rich is a very good candidate. Cy Hirsch has said in a conversation he did not know was being recorded that the FBI has determined from Seth Rich's computer that he was in touch regularly with WikiLeaks. Now, Cy protects his sources. He was astounded that someone surreptitiously recorded that conversation, but he hasn't reneged about it. He just hasn't filled it out. So it's pretty simple. You know, you don't have to worry about being called a conspiracy theorist. And I would maybe just point out that conspiracy theorists, that's the derogatory way to refer to anybody that the establishment wants to marginalize. Where did it start? Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA until he was cashiered by John Kennedy, and a member of the Warren Commission. And the Warren Commission to investigate JFK's killing was convened, okay? All of a sudden, they saw that Allen Dulles had insinuated himself onto the commission. And people said, wait a second, CIA is one of the suspects here, what's going on? And he said, conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, conspiracy theorists. That's the first time that I remember that being used, but boy, you could be very effective by saying conspiracy theorists.
It's a way to just, like you say, marginalize or attack or take away the credibility of anybody who challenges the official narrative.
That's right. And let's take Seth Rich. Now, he had a computer. Where is that computer? Oh, the District of Columbia Police gave it to the FBI. Oh, so it's in safe hands. Give me a break. The FBI is safe hands now? The FBI is, really, really intent on protecting the people who played fast and loose at precisely this period of time with the law, the Constitution, and with the candidates. So, to say that the FBI is looking at Seth Rich's computer, not only does not reassure me in the least, but makes me think that, whoa, wait a second, what's happening to that? Did they give it to CrowdStrike, the computer service that Hillary Clinton hired? So there's lots of bad stuff going on, Rob, not the least of which is that James Comey, head of the FBI, never looked at the DNC computers. Imagine that. In other words, here, a hack by Russia, ostensibly. Telltale signs. What does James Comey do? Hey, he's head of the FBI. Oh, he doesn't do nothing. He doesn't do anything. And when he's asked about this by the Senate Intelligence Committee, he says, Mr. Comey, is it general practice not to go and seize the computers and have physical access to them to fight? Well, no, sir. That is the best practice. But we thought that this CrowdStrike firm was a super firm, and so we didn't do direct forensics. We worked with the CrowdStrike forensics. Well, there's no excuse for that at all, Rob. There's just no excuse for it all. It makes me wonder whether James Comey was a little afraid what his technical people might find in the DNC computers. They might find, and remember I told you this, they might find that it wasn't the Russians, that Lucifer was not the GRU intelligence service. Lucifer was the CIA. That could be a subject for another conversation, but CIA has the tools, one of them called Marble Framework. You could Google it. You won't find anything in the New York Times about it. Marble Framework, which allows the CIA to hack into a computer or a server, disguise who hacked in, and leave little telltale signs like Cyrillic, or in this case, the name of the first head of the KGB, the Cheka at the time, Felix Semundovich. I mean, very, very, very sloppy, very sloppy Russian intelligence. Okay, so Bill Binney and I, now Bill Binney, of course, the expert, I'm the analyst.
Bill Binney was the designer of one of the monitoring systems that NSA was working on that would track all of the phone calls and emails and what have you, except Bill Binney's version of it actually respected the Constitution and the FISA courts and what have you. And it was not the one that the US and NSA went with. And when Binney blew the whistle on the fact that they were spending 100 times more on it and that it violated the Constitution, he was prosecuted and vilified.
Yeah, well, they raided his home together with 4 other former NSA folks, and at gunpoint, he's in the shower. Yeah, they knew that these people were not the ones that leaked the surveillance stuff. They knew it. They already knew that it was this other fellow that worked in the Justice Department. So it's pretty bad. But Bill,
you and Binney looked at this information.
What's that?
You and Binney looked at this.
Yeah, well, here, sometimes, let me just spell out what happened. A CIA NIC leaked something called Vault 7 to WikiLeaks. Now, Vault 7 was a collection of documents describing cyber warfare tools. Who developed them? Mostly NSA, but 5 years ago, Brennan created a whole new directorate at the CIA for cyber warfare. Thousands of NSA folks came to there, and so they developed these weapons. Okay, so March 7th, 2017, there's an announcement by Julian Assange. We have a leak here from a CIA source. We have documents, and no one has challenged the authenticity of these documents, but they show these cyber tools. Cyber tool 1, take control of your car, make it go 110 miles an hour, brakes don't work, you can kill somebody that way. Matter of fact, a fellow named Michael Hastings was killed that way. What was he doing? Actually, he was writing a book about John Brennan. Oh, okay, another tool. You got a South Korean TV. Now you turned it off. Yeah, it's in your bedroom, you're going to sleep or doing something else in your bedroom, but it's on. It's recording everything that works, okay? So both of those were described in March 7 in the New York Times, Washington Post, 2017. Now, on the 31st of March, the next WikiLeaks disclosure comes out. It's called Marble Framework. Now, what does that allow you to do? That allows you to hack in to a computer or a server, disguise who hacked in, and leave little telltale signs. Now, what happened? As you know, Rob, I go and let myself be interviewed by anybody who's interested in the truth. So what happens? 7:30 in the morning, I get a telephone call. Hello, this is RT. We have a very explosive story. Can you come in? I said, well, wait a second, it's 7:15. You're not even open yet. No, we want you to come to the Eurovision studios. Can you come in for 9 o'clock, please, please? I said, well, why? So they sent me the link. And I said, my God, this is explosive. This was the Marble Framework, allowing the CIA cyber tool to hack into a server or a computer system and to disguise who hacked in. So I said, all right. So I'm driving down the carpool lane, right? All alone there, anything for the cause. And I get there 5 minutes before. But on the way, I say to myself, McGovern, what are you going to say? Call up Bill Binney. Bill, you know about Marble Framework? Yeah, Ray. What do I say about it? Well, Ray, this was developed while I was still there. It's 15 years in the making. Tell him this, Ray. Tell him that it involves this Vault 7 series, that it involves 700 million lines of code. 700 million. Got that? I said, yeah, I got that. That sounds like a lot, Bill. He's right. One line of code costs $25. Now, I know you're a history major, for God's sake, but can you multiply 50 or $25 times 700 million? So I said, yeah, okay, I can do that, Bill. So that's what I told him, okay? I had one other interview that day. It was Sputnik, okay? They were the only people interested. It was kept hermetically out of the New York Times.
And we got a wrap.
What's that?
We got a wrap.
Wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want to finish with?
Well, I just want to say that Ellen Nakashima for the Washington Post didn't get the memo on time. And so to her great credit, she let the story out. Headline, CIA disclosure shows CIA hacking into computers, okay? So she included the information that they're working 5 languages: Arabic, Farsi, Chinese, North Korean, and Cyrillic Russian. So nothing in the mainstream press. Please Google Marble Framework. Unless you come across something that Bill Binney and I have done, you won't know about it. But we think that this cyber tool was as likely as not the Lucifer 2 that supplied all this great stuff and information for Bob Mueller to prosecute ostensibly.
All right. I got to wrap. This is the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. I've been interviewing Ray McGovern, a veteran CIA officer. You can find out more about him at raymcgovern.com. Thanks so much, Ray.
Most welcome.